for communities disproportionately impacted by HIV, with a particular focus on Black and brown men who have sex with men, people who use substances, and Black women. Throughout his career, Blake has led the development of culturally responsive interventions to improve access to PrEP and HIV treatment. Today, Blake serves as the award-winning community liaison at Gilead Sciences. In his role, he collaborates with healthcare providers, organizations, and communities to expand rapid access to HIV prevention and treatment options, ensuring that care is equitable, effective, and stigma-free. On behalf of Bradbury-Sullivan and our community at large, I want to state how grateful we are for Blake being with us today, and to Gilead for their support and sponsorship of today's summit.
Greetings and salubrious salutations, friends. My name is Blake Rowley. I use he, him pronouns, but I will also respond to she, her amongst family and friends. Thank you so much for that introduction. I promise not to be before you long because I know that I am in front of the keynote speaker and he is magnificent. But greetings again and welcome to everyone. Thank you to all of the attendees who have been here, all of the supporters, volunteers, and staff who helped make an event like this possible. On behalf of Gilead, it is really an honor to be here at the 2025 Pennsylvania LGBTQIA Health Summit this afternoon. And it's extremely humbling to be in the presence of so many advocates, amazing allies, community leaders, and folks whose voices are leading the way to belonging and community acceptance. Your courage, your commitment, your persistence, and most importantly, your resistance are more vital now than ever to inspire us all to do work and ignite change. Gilead is and will always be committed to empowering members of the LGBTQIA+ and HIV communities. From coast to coast, from Pennsylvania to California, we are on the ground developing interventions and working to help share those results. There is no greater force than this, the power of many working as one. And by bringing together the LGBTQIA+ and HIV communities together as one, we will continue to make great strides in raising the conversation around HIV. By working together and advocating effectively, we are going to amplify the voices of people most affected by HIV, enabling community mobilization towards shared goals, including equitable access to healthcare for all. So let's continue to harness our collective force because what we know is that there is still much more to do. The trans community, the Black, brown, and queer communities continue to face stigma, healthcare disparities, discrimination, and repression, and shocking levels of violence. The HIV epidemic still affects far too many people in far too many places, and what we also know is that medicine alone is not going to be the answer. So we are committed to working with you in the community, and we are dedicated to the cause. It is a fusion of science and community, a community-focused approach that can help bring an end to the HIV epidemic. And so together, we are going to continue to join together as one and leave no person behind. So while we know today we celebrate is June, we will celebrate this entire month. It is Pride. Tomorrow, we will continue to do the work. So with that, it is my pleasure to introduce your keynote speaker, Tommy Walcott-Lee. So just a bit about Tommy. Tommy is a queer public health scholar, educator, and advocate whose work brings together LGBTQIA+ health, human rights, and global justice. His academic and professional path spans public health, conflict resolution, and African studies, united by a commitment to care, equity, and community-based work. His career has spanned higher education and international development, including work in Mozambique, Botswana, and Guyana, where he supported HIV-positive peer educators, championed adolescent girls' empowerment, and collaborated with queer and trans-led civil society organizations to advance human rights. Tommy previously directed the Gender and Sexuality Resource Center at Lafayette College, oversaw academic programs at Boston University School of Public Health, Department of Global Health, and facilitated bystander intervention training with Boston University Center for Sexual Assault Response and Prevention. He holds an MPH in program management with an emphasis on sex, sexuality, and gender, and a graduate certificate in African Studies from Boston University, as well as a BS in conflict analysis and resolution with a minor in public health from George Mason. Tommy is currently a PhD candidate, big up to that, in population health at Lehigh University, where his research explores how legal reform and decriminalization impacts queer health equity in Southern Africa. He also serves as the director of the LGBTQ+ Center at Dickinson College, where he oversees programs that foster belonging, advocacy, and well-being. Through the lens of 3 core values, Tommy offers a hopeful, grounded framework for breaking stigma and building wellness. He invites all of us, practitioners, educators, and neighbors, to view compassion not as soft or optimal, but as a vital structure for liberation. His background in conflict transformation informs his approach to public health and human rights, with a focus on social cohesion, community resilience, and the everyday labor of care. In this keynote, Tommy Walcott-Lee will draw on his personal and professional journey in the LGBTQIA plus health equity to ask, what does it mean to care with compassion? Incorporating lessons from his work in scholarship in public health, conflict resolution, and African studies, Tommy explores how global wisdom can inform local efforts to build systems of care rooted in belonging, dignity, and shared humanity. Grounded in socio-ecological model, life course theory, and the social determinants of health, he introduces the concept of touch points, the everyday interactions, relationships, and systems that profoundly shape the LGBTQIA plus health outcomes across a lifetime. With that, I give you Tommy Walcott-Lee.
Thank you so much. That introduction kind of gave the entire presentation, so. But no, for seriously, I want to first say good afternoon. I want to ask, how are you all doing? It's going to be mixed, I feel it too, but I do want to say happy Pride as well. And I want to give a special shout out. In session 3 that just ended, we did a sing-along. Hopefully no one heard me too much, but to lean on me, and that really grounded me in what I'm going to speak about today. So I want to thank you all for doing that for us. I also want to thank Bradbury-Sullivan LGBT Center for hosting and organizing this summit, for their leadership in advancing LGBTQIA plus health and rights across Pennsylvania, and for acknowledging the fact that the work they do makes this gathering of all of us possible. So thank you for that. And I want to thank all of you who are still here, right at 310. The healthcare professionals, the advocates, the community members, the researchers, for showing up, for being present, for being a part of this conversation. This hasn't been said today yet, so I want to also acknowledge that we are gathered here today on the ancestral and unceded lands of the Lenape people. The Lenape are the original stewards of this region, and their resistance to erasure continues to this day. As we talk about things like health and justice and care, we must remember that wellness has to include Indigenous visibility and cultural survival. As you can maybe see, I am a gay, white, cisgender man. And so I hold a lot of privilege. I also hold an enormous amount of responsibility. So my goal today with this presentation is to speak from the truth that I carry, to share what I've lived and learned through both affirming and harmful experiences. But I want to be really clear that what I say, I cannot speak for all LGBTQIA plus people. Not for trans folks, not for Black and brown and queer communities, not for those who are undocumented, disabled, and pushed furthest to the margins. Rather, I and all of us need to strive to be with these communities. And I encourage all of us after today to really think intentionally about turning to their voices to lead this conversation. It's been said over and over again today, but it's worth repeating that we live in a society where hate and divisiveness are not only present, they're being amplified and weaponized. There is a transparent effort to dismantle, defund, and erase the work of LGBTQIA plus health, the work of DEI, and the research, advocacy, and care that we all know saves lives. Leaders use stigma as strategy. They scapegoat the vulnerable for applause, and they treat human dignity as negotiable. And when hate and intolerance are normalized at the top, they fester, they spread, they get written into policy, and it shows up in our communities, our classrooms, our clinics. It infects our most intimate spaces, our families, our friendships, and even our sense of self. It is hard, and I'll be honest, to stay hopeful. It's hard to keep going when the ground beneath you keeps shifting. But this moment we're sharing today is a chance to remember who we are and why we do this work. The Dalai Lama says that if you want others to be happy, practice compassion. If you want to be happy, practice compassion. And I think today, this summit really is ultimately just about that, compassion. And that's not just a feeling, but a way of being, a way of seeing each other and ourselves with care, with presence, and with responsibility. But what is compassion? I'm sure we all have our own definitions. The Dalai Lama offers that compassion is an openness to the suffering of others with a commitment to relieve it. It is a choice to stay present with someone in their pain and to respond not with judgment, but with care. I want to extend an invitation to all of us. What does it really mean to care with compassion? Compassion is not softness, it's not optional, it's structural. It's a skill, a stance, and it's a vital part of how we build systems of care that don't just treat, they liberate. In the context of LGBTQIA+ communities, where stigma and exclusion are woven into our systems, compassion is a necessity. It's a form of resistance. So let's start with one of our first concepts I want to go over. It's the idea of a touch point. And so in public health, we often talk about turning points or milestones. Those are big moments that shape someone's trajectory. But a touch point is not just a moment in time. It's specifically a person, a human interaction. And they're not just limited to provider-patient exchanges. They exist across all areas of our life. They're in our schools, our workplaces, our homes, our public spaces, and our community programs. They encompass any and all interpersonal determinant of health. They're not just conversations or appointments either. They are really moments of impact, where someone's health outcome can shift, sometimes with compassion, sometimes with harm, but always with consequence. It's a nurse who meets a patient with dignity, a teacher who says, "You're safe here," a parent who listens to their child, a stranger who believes you, and a friend who chooses to stay. They are interactions that profoundly shape the health, confidence, and courage of LGBTQIA+ people, often in ways that policy and procedure can never do. We are all touch points, whether we mean to be or not. Every day in your role, in your community, you become someone's experience of the system. And so the question is not whether we are shaping someone's health, because we are. The question really is how. So one of the things about me is I'm a storyteller, and so I have a lot of stories within this keynote today. And so this is the first one. And I'm sure, like many of you, my earliest understanding of my queerness was built around fear, misinformation, and the beliefs of others that were projected onto me. The first messages I received about myself were rooted in shame. And that shaped how I walked through the world and how I envisioned my future. So when I think about the idea of compassion and care, I think about the moment I came out to my mother. In my imagination, it was always going to be this bold and unapologetic moment, something I would declare with confidence. If you're familiar with La Cage aux Folles, I am what I am. I was so excited, I thought. But the truth was, I was really terrified. I knew that moment would shape everything that came afterward. And the idea of disappointing or possibly losing my mother, or being met with silence or rejection, shattered me. I broke down and barely managed to whimper really, "I'm gay." And in that moment, my mother, the touch point in this story, took a deep breath and said something that I will always cherish. "Please know that I love you very much. You've had time to accept this and process this For me, this is the beginning. She didn't have all the right words, but she had love. And she made it clear that I would be okay. And the rest we could figure out together. That moment did define the course of my life. Her compassion doesn't erase future harm, but it gives me resilience. It gives me a foundation, and it gives me someone who I can always turn to. Because she met me with care, I'm able to walk with more confidence and less fear. And that is the power of a single touch point. It doesn't just shape that interaction, it shapes everything that comes afterward. That moment with my mom, her willingness to love me through her own uncertainty, that to me is what compassion looks like. She recognized my suffering, she accepted her own discomfort, and she responded with care. And so as we think about this idea of compassion, compassion really is the active practice of recognizing another's suffering and choosing to respond with care. If we look to the root of the word, the Latin compati, it literally means to suffer with. And in the academic literature, compassion is understood as a cognitive, emotional, and behavioral process. Something we feel, but also something we think about and have to act on. In one model, compassion includes 5 elements: to recognize suffering, to understand that suffering is a universal human experience, to connect emotionally with the person who is in pain, to tolerate your own discomfort in the face of that pain, and to be motivated to act to alleviate it. That's what makes compassion such a radical act, because what we're often up against is the opposite: stigma. Stigma devalues, it discredits, it dismisses people because of who they are, their identity, their health, their body, their past. Stigma doesn't just shape opinions, it shapes systems, policies, and outcomes. Stigma is the act of withholding care. It says you are other or you are less. Compassion, by contrast, is the act of offering care. It says you belong here and you matter. And don't get it twisted. Compassion is not pity. Pity is inherently stigmatizing. It positions the person in pain as less than, as someone to feel sorry for, rather than someone to stand beside. So again, compassion is not pity. Compassion is a courageous choice to be with, even when, especially when, it's hard. And when practiced fully, it has the power to change lives. So I'm not here to lecture, but I did want to go over some theory as part of this conversation. And so I want to take a really quick look at the framework that helps me to understand this idea. And so really quickly, we have the socio-ecological model, if you're familiar. That helps us to understand how individuals are embedded in layers of influence, from relationships and communities to institutions and societies. It reminds us that a single touch point exists in the context that is shaped by systems, norms, and access. The life course theory is this idea that we look at how health unfolds over time and how experiences can accumulate across a lifespan. A positive or negative touch point is never just one moment. It's part of a trajectory. And the earlier the touch point, oftentimes the more weight it can carry. Lastly, there are the social determinants of health. These are the conditions in which people are born, grow, live, work, and age, and they are the drivers of health disparities. Things like discrimination, economic instability, housing insecurity, these are structural forces, and we know that LGBTQIA plus people encounter them at far higher rates. This is how that looks, and care that isn't just about clinical services. It's about relationships and environments and time. They highlight something that doesn't always show up either in data sets or policy briefs. They highlight the touch points, those moments of connection, of contact, whether they're fleeting or sustained, where a person's sense of safety, worth, and dignity is either affirmed or denied. It could be a doctor who respects your pronouns, or a counselor who ignores you when you disclose your identity, a friend who tells you you're not alone, or a provider who turns you away after you share your truth. Charts aren't always the most effective thing, so I want to offer another image to think about. So let's imagine you arrive at a fork in the road, and it seems that you have two options. You can go to the left or to the right. You look at this and you see to the left that you have opportunity, a path towards healing, safety, affirmation. And to the right, you have a sense of uncertainty. It looks rough, maybe even unsafe. Instinctively, you know which way you want to go. But then you look at it again, and on the left path, the one that felt promising, maybe you see a roadblock. Maybe it's an ID checkpoint, an armed guard, a dress code. Maybe it's a law, a policy, or a whispered judgment. Something that tells you you don't belong here on this path. That right path still seems uncertain, but no one's stopping you. So you go that way. Not because it's safer, not because it's better, but because it was available. I think we make the mistake in health to often think that our behaviors are shaped only by choices that we make at each fork in the road. But what we forget to not acknowledge are the touch points. People who respond with bias, people who might have affirmations that determine which path feels safe to take and which ones were denied entirely. I also want to turn to some global wisdom. And so to truly understand what compassionate care is and can be, we don't just need Western public health frameworks. We also need global wisdom, ways of being that center dignity, justice, and connection. The first one I want to talk about is a luta continua, which is from Mozambique. A luta continua. It's the phrase that the struggle continues. It originated as a revolutionary slogan during Mozambique's war for independence against colonial rule. And it was made famous by Samora Machel, the country's first president, who used it to ignite his people in a collective resistance. It is a reminder that freedom is never given. It's earned, protected, and expanded through persistence. The struggle continues. Today, that phrase, a luta continua, has been widely adapted and adopted by African LGBTQIA+ human rights activists. And it's used across African nations as a way to combat laws and stigma. In Uganda, for example, a luta continua is a way of grounding courage in community, of remembering those who came before and recommitting to the struggle they carried. It's a call to organize, to protect one another, and to carry forward the work that many have given their lives to begin. It teaches us that compassion requires endurance. And it includes the deeper, continuous work of justice, of shifting hearts and systems and lived realities. Another concept that is foundational comes from Botswana. And that's where a lot of my PhD research is happening, looking at the impacts of decriminalization of homosexuality. And so Botswana championed a cultural value called botho. It's rooted in a Setswana phrase, motho ke motho ka botho, which translates roughly into a person is a person through other people. I am because you are. You might be familiar with Ubuntu from South Africa. It's similar, but this is a specifically Botswana concept. Botho reminds us that our humanity is bound up in one another's. It asks us, who are you in relation to the people around you? And how does your behavior, your compassion, your care shape the humanity of others? When the High Court of Botswana struck down the criminalization of homosexuality in 2019, the judges echoed this concept. They ruled that any discrimination against a member of society is discrimination against all. To discriminate against one segment of our society pollutes compassion. Discrimination isn't just a personal failing. It's a toxin that spreads through systems and societies. And so I bring these philosophies because they're not just theoretical to me. They really guide me, and they teach me that health is not just physical. It's relational, it's spiritual, it's political, and it's personal. There's also the philosopher Ibn Rushd, who said, ignorance leads to fear, fear leads to hatred, and hatred leads to violence. And we see that cycle playing out again and again in the lives of LGBTQIA plus people, especially trans people, especially Black and brown people. But if ignorance leads to fear, then what can lead us in a different direction? And for me, that answer lies in 3 core values that form a foundation of compassionate care: humility, empathy, and interconnectedness. And we're going to dive into each of those. We see these values across religions, across disciplines. We can find evidence of them in every tradition that honors human dignity. They're universal in nature, but often deeply personal in how we come to understand them. They aren't just tools either for professionals. They're guiding principles for anyone, any of us, who interacts with others in moments of vulnerability. They turn compassion from a feeling into a practice. And so I want to go through each one. Humility, which I don't know which one's my favorite, but I do like this one a lot. Humility is a modest or low view of one's own importance. A modest or low view of one's own importance. But I want to be really clear, in a space with LGBTQIA plus people, it's not the opposite of pride. It's not about making yourself small or hiding who you are. Those aren't acts of humility, those are responses to stigma. Reactions to a world that often tells us to tone it down or to be smaller. As LGBTQI plus people, we have every right to be proud of who we are. Pride is a necessary resistance to shame, its survival, and its power. But humility reminds me not to let that pride become complacency. It's the awareness that my ability to walk in pride today is built on the backs of those who didn't get to. It's knowing that my safety, my joy, my visibility, they weren't guaranteed. They were made possible through care, and they're still vulnerable to harm. Humility doesn't silence, it remembers. It says, don't ever forget how fragile this is. Don't ever forget how many people didn't make it here. And don't stop showing up for those still trying to. Once I came out of the closet, I started to feel hopeful and proud, and I was learning to embrace my queerness. But as I was coming into that pride, I remember being hit again and again with the stories of young gay kids who didn't reach that same place. Names like Asher Brown, Jamie Rodemeyer, Tyler Clementi. These names were in the news, but their stories felt heartbreakingly close. Not because I knew them, but because I could have been them. Humility is that feeling of grief that jumps out from the headlines, but also from the data, the policy memos, the reports. It's seeing stories in numbers, pain in percentages, and recognizing that behind every figure, every data point, is a human life. If we look at the Pennsylvania Health Needs Assessment, the LGBTQ plus one, 62% of respondents said they felt sad or hopeless almost every day for at least 2 weeks in the past year. 1 in 4 delayed care from a fear of discrimination. 20% seriously considered suicide, and that number is even higher among trans and non-binary respondents. Nearly half don't know where to access affirming healthcare. These are not just statistics. These are people, names, futures. Each one represents someone who could have used a compassionate touch point and didn't encounter them. And that's what humility looks like to me. It's hearing stories, seeing statistics that are deeply human, and asking, why not me? What protective factor, what moment of affirmation, which touch point spared me? It's the realization that one moment of care can make the difference between life and loss. Humility asks us to carry that knowledge, not as guilt, but as a responsibility. It keeps us from ever becoming too distant from the people we talk about in public health, because we are those people. And the only difference between one health outcome and another's might be a single interaction, a single thread that led us when we were fragile. Humility keeps me grounded in the truth that I am not above, not beyond, and not exempt. Humility is what keeps compassion honest. So then there is empathy, which basically is the ability to understand and share the feelings of others. But I want to be honest and acknowledge that this word is overused quite a bit. It's really become a buzzword, especially among helping professionals. And it's often misunderstood and overused. We talk about it without always practicing it. And we often confuse it with sympathy or being nice. But real empathy is harder than that. It asks us to see ourselves in people who we might not immediately recognize, to listen without an agenda, to stay present in someone else's pain without rushing to fix it or flee. It is knowing that someone's path, it is not knowing someone's path exactly, but being willing to walk beside them. And in public health, it demands that we connect with stories that might make us uncomfortable. For me, empathy comes through listening and through bearing witness. Empathy means holding spaces even when what is said is hard to hear. I have another story. And so I was once teaching a global health and human rights course at an international summer camp with a mix of students from all around the world. On the second to last day, I led a session on global LGBTQIA+ rights, and I knew that would be difficult because of the mix of backgrounds and beliefs and exposures that were in the room. But I also knew it was important to do it and to share my own identity, so I came out to the class. Afterwards, several students came up to me, they thanked me, they shared that they also were LGBTQIA, or that they knew someone who was, someone they loved. Others were clearly uncomfortable. One student in particular, a young woman from Egypt, waited until the room was empty and asked if she could speak with me. She said, "While I respect you as my teacher, my religious beliefs compel me to tell you that I hate you because you're gay." And that's never easy to hear. But in that moment, I stopped and I saw something that I recognized in her, a struggle. I remembered from my own youth that tension between belief and identity, between what we're taught and what we encounter. So I tried to respond calmly as I could, and I echoed language that we use when people come out to us. I said, "Thank you for telling me that. I want to acknowledge how hard that must have been to say. Thank you for not holding it in. And I want you to know that I don't hate you. In fact, I only have love for you. And I hope that someday you might feel differently." She left, and I carried that conversation with me all night. I played it over and over again in my head, wondering, did I respond the right way? The next day, which was the last day of the class, some students chose not to come back, but she did. And afterwards, she asked if she could speak to me again. She told me that she had also been thinking about our conversation, and she said, "You know, I never met a queer person before." We all know if that probably isn't true, but in her mind, she hadn't. And she said, "I want you to know, I've been thinking about it and I don't hate you. In fact, I'm sorry that I said I did." And I was stunned, right? What took me years to unlearn, she was beginning to confront in a matter of hours. Because of a human moment, because of a presence. So I thanked her and I said, "I hope you carry this with you. And I hope the next time you meet an LGBTQIA+ person, maybe even in Egypt, especially in Egypt, you respond with compassion. That to me is empathy, not agreement, not comfort, but being willing to sit with someone, even across difference, to risk being changed or being the one who offers it. It also reminded me of a time that I conducted an interview with Richard Lusimbo, who's an LGBTQIA+ activist from Uganda. And we were speaking about the ongoing struggle for queer liberation in his country. And one of my last questions I asked was, what gives you hope? What sustains you in this work? And his answer really does inspire me. He said, I want to open a bigger dialogue with the entire Ugandan population about why rights for LGBTQIA+ people are important. Change must come from within society. We must have a serious conversation. It's important to ask who else is a part of this conversation or struggle, and then invite them to the table. Transformation of society means you have to be a part of other people's causes. Empathy is exactly that. It is a commitment to connection, even across difference, across culture, across pain. And it's a willingness to believe that transformation is possible even in the most resistant places. It's understanding that our struggles are not separate. Empathy is what moves compassion from care to solidarity.